Hi there, folks. I'm here at the legislature with Tanya Furr, our Minister of Economic Development, Trade and Tourism. Thanks for joining us, Tanya.
Thank you.
It's been a little while since I've done a Facebook Live, but Tanya and I wanted to talk to you about Alberta's recovery plan. This is the economic plan that I outlined in Calgary about, I think about 12 days ago. And this is the overall framework for Alberta's plan to get us out of the COVID economic crisis. As you know, I've said many times, we're facing a triple whammy as a province. First of all, the biggest public health crisis in over a century. Secondly, the biggest contraction of the global economy since the 1930s. And thirdly, the biggest collapse in energy prices in history, affecting obviously our largest industry in the province. And Alberta's government has responded with real ambition to try to protect not only lives, but also livelihoods. That's $14 billion of economic action that we have taken. And why don't you tell some people some of those things that we've done, Tanya, in terms of the COVID action plan on the economic side?
Yeah, so for sure. So we have come out of the COVID pandemic. We had a successful stage 1. Stage 2, we were able to move up a relaunch of stage 2 a week early. We're hopeful for stage 3. We're so proud of the hard work of Albertans in adhering to safety standards and keeping levels of infections and hospitalizations low. And as we move forward with our relaunch, we will continue to find that right balance of protecting our most vulnerable while reopening our economy.
And Tanya's been very involved in developing a lot of the policies that have tried to keep our economy on life support through that $14 billion in fiscal action, which has involved everything from the 3-month deferral on utility payments, rent protection for both residents and commercial tenants, billions of dollars of liquidity for businesses through Alberta Treasury branches, the emergency isolation payments for people at the beginning of the pandemic who were sick and had to stay home. Why don't you tell folks about the economic relaunch grants for small businesses?
Yeah, absolutely. So we introduced a grant of up to $5,000 for small and medium businesses, that as they relaunch, they can spend that money where they see best, whether that's for wages or inventory or rent, to help them relaunch and reopen successfully. Great uptake of that process so far. Premier, thousands of applicants so far, millions of dollars that we'll be spending on that to support our small businesses, who we know are the backbone of our economy.
100%. So, by the way, if you've got questions, put them in the comment section below. We're going to get to your questions in just a second. Just trying to set some context. So we've been talking about Alberta's response to the height of the pandemic, but now we really want to focus, hopefully this Facebook Live session, on our economic recovery plan, which is more about the mid to, well, yes, there is some short-term job creation here for sure, but also it's about the path to mid to long-term prosperity. And I'm going to ask our team to please put a link in the comment section below where you can go and actually check out the recovery plan. It is a work in progress. It's not all of the policy work in every area is completely done. I'll just give you a couple of highlights. This is a plan, a bold and ambitious plan to build, to diversify, and to create jobs. To build in part through the largest Build Alberta infrastructure investment in our province's history, $10 billion, this year alone. And probably it'll be about $20 billion over 2 years. The $10 billion this year in capital investments that we estimate will create about 50,000 direct construction jobs, lots of other ancillary jobs amongst suppliers, vendors, small businesses. These are projects that we are deliberately choosing that will help to create long-term economic productivity so the Alberta economy is more efficient and competitive. We're not spending money to, just to fill potholes or for the sake of it. We're picking strategic projects. Today, I announced, I think, $120 million investment, for example, in twinning Terwilliger Drive and other critical road infrastructure in the heavily congested southwest corner of Edmonton. That will make that important urban part of Alberta operate more efficiently. To give you one example, last week it was the Lethbridge Ag Trade Exhibition to make that into a global showcase for Alberta agriculture products. So that's the $10 billion capital build. Another critical part, to be the most competitive place in North America for new business investment. And tell folks about the job creation tax credit, Tanya.
Yeah, for sure.
Job creation tax cut, I should say, not tax credit.
Yeah, for sure. So we accelerated, our job creation tax cut was at 10%. As of July 1st, we accelerated it to 8%, making Alberta the lowest in all of Canada and lower than 44 U.S. states. We think it's going to be hard for businesses to find a reason to justify not relocating to Alberta with a tax rate that competitive for job creators.
In addition, our Alberta's recovery plan outlined a number of what we call sectoral strategies to further diversify our economy, building on our strength of our energy sector. Unlike some, our government does not believe that oil and gas is a problem for Alberta, but rather it is a great asset, a key part of our future, and something that we must maximize. But also it can be leveraged to diversify our economy. There are so many spin-offs from oil and gas. Tanya used to work at one of our largest oil companies. She knows this very well. And you were a executive for human resources. You know, one of the reasons our province diversified was people coming to this province to work in the energy sector. And when they came here, they needed to buy houses, and that meant construction jobs. They needed services. That meant expansion of our service sector. So we believe that oil and gas isn't an impediment to diversifying Alberta's economy, but a key agent of diversification. But we also need to be very deliberate, in our view, about ensuring continued diversification. So we talk in the plan about sectoral strategies on agriculture and forestry, on, for example, tourism. Why don't you say a quick word about that, Tanya?
For sure. So as Premier mentioned, the strategy, there's going to be sectoral specific strategies for energy and agriculture, as the Premier mentioned, for tourism, which is our fourth largest sector. We're working on a 10-year tourism strategy that we were working on before COVID. We're still working on it now. We're just repositioning it. And then, of course, and Premier, maybe you were getting to this, but we're also going to be focusing on enabling and high growth sectors like technology.
So technology is one of the sectors, and we'll be outlining the details next week. You will, I think, of the new innovation tax credit that will put us on a level playing field with other provinces in attracting high-paying tech jobs, culture, supporting startup industry, aviation, aerospace, and logistics, finance and financial technology, or so-called fintech, and many other emerging sectors. But energy continues to be critically important. Just today, Tanya, you announced the outline of a revised incentive to bring potentially tens of billions of dollars of investment and tens of thousands of jobs in adding value to our natural gas and oil resources through the petrochemical diversification program. Do you want to give folks a little outline about that?
Actually, it was Minister Nally.
It was Dale Nally.
Yeah, so I'll let you speak to that.
Oh, okay, all right. So that's basically a smarter way of incenting major capital investment. A lot of that would be actually east of Edmonton in the industrial heartland, but elsewhere too. We better get to the questions. I'm sorry. I'm so excited about this plan, and it's so dense that there's a lot to talk about. We're going to go to Elaine Bruce with the first question. What's the priority for getting through the COVID-19 pandemic economically? Well, I would say, Elaine, the short-term priority is protecting people's livelihoods. And that means, look, we're probably looking at right now about a 20 to 25% real unemployment rate. And so it's critical to get those folks back to work. That's one of the reasons why Alberta has opened areas of our economy that had been more restricted during the height of the pandemic. And I'm pleased to tell you that as tough as things are, the COVID contraction in Alberta has been smaller than in other major Canadian provinces, I think in part because we kept more of our economy open during the pandemic. 85% of businesses representing 88% of workforce and 95% of our GDP were able to continue operating under our safe guidelines. Other provinces, Quebec and Ontario, for example, shut down far more of their economies. All of construction, all of manufacturing was suspended in those provinces. We let those sectors continue to operate, to give you one example. So we are even notwithstanding the body blow to our energy industry with the price collapse, we are starting in a stronger position. And here's some good news. Gosh knows we need some. Energy prices have recovered to what I would call a survival level more quickly than we anticipated. You know, we were trading Alberta oil at minus prices about 5 weeks ago, excuse me. But we now have WTI at about $40 a barrel and Western Canada Select at about $33 a barrel. Our companies can survive at that price point, and in the midterm, we can expect to see prices to go up considerably as global demand and economic activity return. And there will then be a supply shortage because of all the exploration activity that has been canceled due to the COVID price collapse. So I believe there is a solid future for the energy industry. Our challenge as a government now is to kind of build a bridge over the chasm that we are facing right now, and that's in part why we're rolling out the economic recovery plan. I always say, Tanya, you hear me say this all the time, Albertans are natural optimists, but they need a reason for their optimism, right? It's not blind, dumb optimism. If they see that we have a plan, that we're making smart investments in critical areas to support private sector growth. I'll give you one example. A week ago today, I believe, a week ago tomorrow morning, I was with Nate Horner in Oyen to launch construction on the Alberta spread of the Keystone XL pipeline, a critical long-term investment made by Alberta. All right, next question goes to, actually, why don't you read the next one,
for
Tanya?
sure.
Sorry.
So from Ryan Kurtz, what is the plan to bring back jobs and create new jobs? Are we looking at the future to bring in new business? Well, I'd love to answer this one. So just earlier this week, we announced our Invest Alberta Corporation with the goal of bringing investment back to Alberta. So we saw billions of dollars of investment leave this province under the previous government, and our government is committed to bringing that back. And the goal of the Invest Alberta Corporation will be to attract new foreign direct investment, that high value, high impact investment. Listen, folks, as jurisdictions begin to open up again, the economy starts to open up again, we have to be able to compete with other areas that have these types of investment agencies, Quebec, Ontario, BC, and Saskatchewan, for example. It's going to be fierce, and we need to compete, and we need to aggressively, proactively get out there and have those eyeball-to-eyeball meetings with potential investors, sharing the word that we are open for business, and there is no better place to invest and come to than Alberta.
Which we've underscored with the acceleration of the job creation tax cut. On July the 1st, we took Alberta business tax rate from 10 to 8%, and when a year ago it was 12. So we've reduced the tax rate on job creators by a third to make us the most attractive jurisdiction in Canada and almost the most attractive in North America on the tax front. But we're also reducing red tape, which is, I think, probably the biggest barrier to new job creating private sector businesses. We're reducing red tape by at least a third, and I think we have 3 red tape reduction bills in the legislature right now. I mean, we are obsessive about this. So we better go to the next question. Svetlana Koshkareva says, I like diversification. Now a lot of tourists are going to Banff and Jasper from other provinces. How is the government helping to improve this area? Great question, Svetlana. By the way, I'm glad to hear that there are more tourists from other provinces going there. We've actually been talking about up till now, we've been really heavily promoting, because of the shutdown on travel and foreign visitors not being able to come to Alberta, having a devastating impact on our tourism industry. So obviously, Tanya's trade section of her ministry, Tourism Alberta, they've been focused at our direction on promoting a staycation for Albertans to really get to know our own beautiful backyard through local tourism in the province. And you were with me up in Banff on the weekend with Miranda Rosen. It was nice to see lots of people out staying in the hotels, going to the restaurants, enjoying the new pedestrian walk on Banff Avenue. But since then, that got Tanya and I talking about maybe we should be redirecting some of the tourism promotion dollars to encourage some of our fellow Canadians to come and enjoy, because the Americans can't come up here, overseas visitors cannot fly here. The level of COVID infection is extremely low in BC and Saskatchewan, our neighboring provinces. It's almost nil in those two provinces right now. So why not bring some of those our tourist dollars back to Alberta? And so we're going to look at doing that. And also, Svetlana, we are looking at it at strategic investments in infrastructure to create an even better tourism offering, a better product. One thing that we're looking at in partnership with the Canada Investment Bank is a potential Calgary Airport to Banff light rail or rail line to really speed up and make it more environmentally friendly and just a better experience for that marquee attraction. We don't want to, for a second, neglect or undersell all of the other tourism attractions around the province, but Banff and Jasper are a global brand. My view, Tanya, is we promote those, including with infrastructure like a potential rail line, to make that a better trip. And then we encourage people to stay the extra 2 or 3 days, to go to Waterton, to go to the Cypress Hills, to go to Drumheller. What's your view?
I mean, exactly, Premier. They can come in, stay, and go to other areas of the province that are so incredible, whether it's Métis Crossing or Writing on Stone Provincial Park or the Badlands to check out the Coolies and Hoodoos or the Royal Tyrrell Museum. And the bonus of that is it helps support small businesses. We know the overwhelming majority of our tourism operators are small businesses, and this helps them. It helps them recover. So we encourage folks to check out travelalberta.com for a whole list of things to do and to check out this summer.
Thanks, Tanya. So next question goes to, actually, why don't you read this one? We'll trade off back and forth.
Yeah, from Leanne Kalin. Even if the tax rate is that low, they won't come to Alberta. People are leaving. Why not work to keep them from leaving the province? You want big business to come, but people are leaving. We need oil and gas, but we also need public services. Stop cutting those Albertans and their careers.
So, Leanne, you're right. We have seen some Albertans leave. In fact, under the previous NDP government, for the first time in Alberta's modern history, we saw for about 2.5 years a net out migration of Canadians from Alberta. Thankfully, that has since turned around, and last year we saw about 40,000. I think it was actually 50,000 growth in Alberta's population. Obviously, there's always some people that come and some people that go, but we want Albertans, obviously, to stay here, Leanne, and that's why we're focused on bringing job-creating investment. You know, we're not going to keep young Albertans looking for employment here just by telling them to hang around. We need to give economic opportunity. And the government doesn't have a magic wand to wave and just create tens of thousands of good private sector jobs. And we can't afford to, if you could keep the question, we can't afford to just, spend ourselves into the poorhouse. So what we're trying to do here is to make Alberta the most attractive place in North America for businesses to invest in, to create new jobs. That's what the strategy is predicated on. In terms of public services, Leanne, you'll be happy to know, I suspect you'll be happy to know at least, that Alberta spends more on a relative basis on public services than I believe anywhere else in North America. We spend about 20% more on a per-person basis than other governments across Canada do for the same bundle of services. And oddly, we do so even though we have the youngest population. It's really kind of odd that we spend 20% more per person on health care than British Columbia or Ontario, even though we have a younger population less prone to end up sick or in hospital. We should have the lowest health expenses, but we have the highest. And we also, that's true of education, that's true of government generally here. And when you say we're cutting those Albertans, in fact, Leanne, as a fiscal conservative, I don't really celebrate this, but the government is spending more today than it ever has. This government has increased spending in health and education and public services generally. What we've been trying to do, Leanne, is to stop massive annual increases in taxpayer spending, because we can't run endless, massive deficits. Ultimately, that has to be paid back plus interest. Today's deficits are tomorrow's taxes. Higher taxes discourage people from working and saving. Higher taxes discourage businesses from opening and investing. Higher taxes discourage job creation in the private sector. So we need to be, in the long run, fiscally responsible. Now, obviously, right now, Tanya, we're coping with the COVID crisis, which has created massive deficits in every jurisdiction around the world. But when it comes, Leanne, I don't know who told you this. Maybe it was the NDP or some of their special interest friends that the government is, quotes, cutting Albertans in their careers in the public sector. In fact, we have added hundreds of millions of dollars to the health budget. The transfers to school boards to support education, it's true they're flat, but that means they're flat at the record high level and a higher relative level than any other province. Before COVID, our fiscal plan was gradually to get our finances back to balance, to stop indebting ourselves to bankers and bondholders through, get this, Leanne, this is not an opinion, it's a hard fact. You can go and verify it yourself by looking it up on the, in fact, I'll ask our team to please put a link below to the budget 2020 budget. You'll see in there that our aim was to reduce overall public spending in Alberta by 2.8%. That's 3 pennies on the dollar. And I guess, Leanne, this is what I would ask you. Are you able to find 3 pennies on the dollar of your personal budget? Do you think there are, don't you realize that there are millions of Alberta families that have seen these are private sector families, not public sector families, private sector families who've seen their incomes go down by 10, 20, 30% or more? Are you really prepared to ask them to pay more and more and more for the most expensive public services in Canada? So, Leanne, I think it's very important for us to take a balanced approach to these issues. All right, we'll go with the next question, which is, trying to find something. Oh, there we go. Dave Fenner says, please open the border up. People need to get back to their family members. Thanks, David. I guess you're talking about the Canada-U.S. border. And you're right to raise that. I have been asking the federal government to work with us in developing a protocol for what I call safe travel. A number of other countries around the world have done that. But frankly, Dave, this is something that is beyond Alberta's control. It's the federal Canadian government and the federal U.S. government that have signed this bilateral agreement to prohibit non-essential travel between Canada and the U.S. So Alberta cannot dictate what President Trump does, obviously. He and his administration have decided to close the U.S. border to Canadians, and it's reciprocal from a decision by Ottawa. But I am pleased to say that Alberta never imposed travel restrictions on people coming or on Canadians coming or going from this province. We did see some interprovincial travel restrictions down east, but we have not done that as a province. And once again, Dave, I am strongly urging the federal government to not endlessly extend the ban on so-called non-essential travel between Canada and the United States. Now, having said that, Dave, look, let's face it, there is a problem with the major COVID outbreaks happening all over again in several U.S. states. And so a lot of Canadians, a lot of Albertans are understandably nervous about that. All right, why don't you take the next question?
Sure. So we have Jeff McDonald. Aren't you trying to privatize healthcare now? This is something being talked about by people.
Should I take that? Well, Jeff, no, we're not. I know it's being talked about by the NDP and their special interest friends, but Jeff, you know what? The oldest tactic in the political book in Canada is the NDP Meta Scare campaign. I'm 51, 52, I got 52. I cannot remember a single campaign in history, I don't know if you can, Tim, where the NDP did not say that a Conservative Party intended to privatize healthcare. They've been saying that for longer than I've been alive. Yeah. And it's always been, it's their big lie. Yeah. And I get it, they can't talk about the economy, so they try to scare people about Medicare. Look, we ran on a commitment to maintain publicly funded universal access to healthcare and to maintain or increase the healthcare budget, and we are absolutely keeping both commitments. Maybe what you're referring to is, Jeff, is our recent Bill 31, I believe it is, a recent bill introduced by Minister Shandro, which allows for a wider use of what are called chartered surgical facilities as part of implementing our election platform commitment to Albertans to have a strategic surgical initiative, which replicates what they did very successfully in Saskatchewan. You see, Jeff, I think that the healthcare system should not be about ideology or politics. I don't think it should be about unions or special interests. I don't think it should be about protecting monopolies for special interests. I think it should be about one thing only: patients, patient care, timely, quality care for patients, not politics. We are doing a disservice to Alberta patients by having some of the longest surgical wait times in Canada. Isn't that bizarre, Jeff, that we spend more per person than every province on healthcare with the youngest population, and yet, according to the Canadian Institute for Health Information, and according to the Ernst & Young Performance Review of Alberta Health Services, and according to Dr. Janice McKinnon's report on Alberta's finances, and according to multiple think tanks and objective data, we have generally longer surgical wait times than other provinces that spend less on Medicare and that have older populations, Jeff. I'm not going to sit here and let big government unions, special interests, or the NDP defend long surgical wait times. The NDP government before us ended up spending $1 billion more than that, excuse me. They increased the health budget by 15%. And yet surgical wait times generally went up. People are waiting in pain, in many cases for 2 years or longer for joint surgery, for example, immobilized, unable to work. In too many cases, becoming addicted to opioids and painkillers, which can destroy their lives. Now, I'm not going to let special interests say, that doesn't matter. Get in the back of the queue and you're going to wait, doesn't matter. We're going to make everybody go only to one kind of state-run hospital for the surgery. No. We should do what other provinces, like Saskatchewan, the birthplace of Medicare, do, where they allow for fairly widespread contracting out of publicly funded surgeries to, yes, privately operated day surgery clinics. We're always doing that in Alberta. Under the NDP, which claims to oppose private delivery of healthcare, 15% of surgeries performed in Alberta were performed in privately operated surgical centers. In Saskatchewan, it's a much higher percentage. That's the province where Tommy Douglas invented Medicare in Canada. So for me, it doesn't matter, and I don't think it should matter to any Albertan, whether the surgery is done in a government surgical center or a privately operated surgical center. What should matter is how long it takes. We're adding more money to the system, by the way. Minister Shandro and I announced this back, I think in November, a few months back. We're adding more money to create more surgical suites in the publicly side of the system. And what this recent bill does is allow for more contracting of publicly funded surgeries with no queue jumping into privately operated surgical facilities. Now, one other point. Pretty much all of the doctors who operate in our system do so as professional corporations. When you go and visit your local family doc, he is operating as a private corporation. So what we have is universal public insurance, but generally private delivery, even for the surgeons who operate professional corporations in our state hospitals. All right, Tanya Ironside says, do you have any figures showing the money unions are put into political campaigns compared to money contributed to by corporations and individuals? I do, actually, Tanya. And this became an issue in the last couple of days in the legislature. In the last 3 years, since 2017, unions have put in $4.8 million into advertising campaigns to essentially support the NDP or attack the party I lead and the Alberta government now. That's $4.8 million. $1.8 million of that came from one group alone, the Alberta Federation of Labor. I think $2.3 million came from the Healthcare Services Union. I think nearly $2 million came from the Alberta Teachers Association. So we're talking about a lot of money. There is no cap on that. That's why this fall we will be introducing legislation to keep our platform commitment to put a $30,000 cap on how much unions or corporations can put into so-called third-party expenditures, also known as political action committees. We'll also be plugging a huge loophole for big money in Alberta politics, which allows legal affiliates of political parties like the NDP and the Alberta Federation of Labor are legally affiliated. So the NDP, through the Alberta Federation of Labor, is spending money through a union. We're going to say, you can't do that. If the Conservative Party was legally affiliated with the Alberta Business Council or something, having them spend money, that would be outrageous. And so too it is with other parties. So we'd be plugging that loophole. In terms of business corporations, you can go to the website of Elections Alberta. You should know that it is illegal for unions or corporations to contribute directly to political parties. We support that. We're not going to change that. But they can contribute to these third-party expenditure campaigns. And I'm not sure the total numbers, but the amount that businesses have put into those kinds of campaigns is a fraction of what unions have. And so now, one last point. We just introduced legislation to empower ordinary union members to decide whether or not they want to opt in through their union dues to fund political campaigns of various kinds. I'll give you a couple of examples. Unifor is a big national union. They have campaigned against every pipeline: Northern Gateway, Trans Mountain expansion, Keystone XL, Energy East, Clipper, you name it, they've campaigned against it. And yet, they took the union dues of Alberta oil field workers that belong to Unifor to campaign against those pipelines that those Unifor workers depend on. I'll give you another example. Unifor and other unions like the postal workers have spent money on campaigns to attack Israel. In one case, the Canadian Jewish Affairs Council referred to one of these campaigns as anti-Semitic, promoting a double standard of boycott and divestment from the only Jewish country on the face of the earth. So imagine you're a Jewish Albertan who's a member of Unifor. You are forced right now through your dues to engage, to support anti-Semitic, anti-Israeli campaigns. Through our new bill 33.
Oh, I get them mixed up.
Our new labor bill, I get 32. Them mixed up too. Our new labor bill, that Jewish member of Unifor, that oil field worker, will be able effectively to opt not to send their dues to campaigns with which they disagree. All right, why don't you take the next one?
Sure. So it's from Dylan Kubasek. I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Can we get rid of the Alberta tourism levy for Alberta citizens? It's ridiculous that we Albertans are taxed to visit our backyard. So let me talk a little bit about that. One of the things we did do to help out our struggling tourism operators as they recover from COVID is we abated the tourism levy until December of this year. And one of the biggest things we heard from them was they wanted to keep that cash in their pocket, the need for liquidity. That measure will give them anywhere between $16 to $27 million. The Alberta tourism levy, of course, it's not just Albertans. Anyone that visits from anywhere pays that. We think those funds are really important. the way that we use them. One of the things that we look at is, whether it's Travel Alberta spending that money for more marketing promotions, it's important that we have funds to help our recovering tourism industry. And one of the big steps we took on that was abating it for the balance of the year. I'm not sure if you want to add to that, Premier.
No, that's good. So, Dylan, we've got, and Tanya and I are talking about some bold measures to ensure a future for the tourism industry. It is probably, apart from the airlines, the most heavy hit industry in Alberta.
Yeah, it was first hit. It was the hardest hit. We've had dozens of roundtables with tourism companies comprising, hundreds and hundreds of tourism stakeholders that we spoke to. We know how hard this has been for them, and will continue to be. And we are here to support our tourism industry and to help them recover.
When we release our tourism sector strategy for the Alberta Recovery Plan, Ruben Diaz asks, when is the third phase? I'll be meeting with Dr. Hinshaw, actually, I think tomorrow, Ruben, certainly with Minister Chandro and senior health officials to discuss exactly that. I don't yet know when the third phase of the relaunch will be. I hope it'll be sooner than later. I will tell you this, we suspended, our public health restrictions through the pandemic have been less stringent than any province in Canada. And I believe, with the possible exception of South Dakota, and certainly the exception of Sweden, our public health restrictions have been less stringent than anywhere in the Western world, North America or Europe. And yet, Albertans have showed great responsibility. We've had the lowest level of infections from COVID, hospitalizations, ICU admissions, and COVID-related deaths of the large Canadian provinces, lower than, I believe, any U.S. state, and lower than any European country. So we took a different approach than most places. We did much more to trust people to exercise their freedom responsibly, and Albertans really came through in a shining way. We want to continue with that. However, we are concerned that we do continue to see new cases, in typically averaging about 45 new cases a day. Here's the good news. So the bad news is we're not, in terms of new cases, as low as some other places are right now. On the other hand, we're testing a lot more. I think today we pulled about 6,800 tests. We had about 45 new cases. And the most important thing is, very few of those newly infected COVID patients are ending up in hospital. I think we're now down to, we've been averaging about 45 people in hospital, about 6, 7 in ICUs. So the numbers have been quite stable. So I look forward to the advice of our Chief Medical Officer for Health, Dr. Hinshaw, on when we could move forward with further relaxation, with one caveat, which is this. You can see how in many U.S. states they opened up quite broadly and early, only to see a massive surge in new infections. And I'm told that in some states, and this may include, I understand, Florida, that they're getting dangerously close to maximum capacity of their ICU beds. And that's the worst case scenario in COVID, is where your ICU capacity becomes overwhelmed. Because then the medical practitioners have to start making brutal decisions like they did in Milan and Madrid about who to treat, who not to treat. We do not want to end up there, is all I'm saying. So I'd love to get to phase 3 of relaunch tomorrow, but we have to be careful so we don't relive the experience of some of those U.S. states and other countries. Paul Small, why don't you go ahead with that one, Tanya?
So Paul Small asks, is there going to be widespread testing for COVID-19 antibodies? I believe that the virus is already widespread and herd immunity well underway. If this is proven correct, we can fully put our economy back on track?
Great question, Paul. And the answer is yes. We are launching a major antibody study in Alberta. I think Minister Chandro announced that the outlines of that last week. We will have the biggest, just as Alberta has led the entire world in the per capita incidence of COVID-19 testing, so too we will be leading the world, certainly Canada, on antibody testing. So just to give people some more context, most of the tests that are done, those swabs, for example, those indicate whether or not you currently have the COVID-19 or the novel coronavirus. What they don't tell us is, like, 99% of those, 99.3% of those tests done in Alberta, of which we've done like 450,000, they're coming back negative. What we don't know from those conventional tests is which percentage of the negative patients have developed the antibodies. Because one thing we know about the coronavirus is that most people who get infected will experience little or no symptoms, and that's especially true the younger you are. And so it's quite, and what Paul's getting at is it's quite possible that a significant number of the negative test results are coming from people who had COVID-19, who didn't have symptoms or never recognized the symptoms, who have since fully recovered from it, and who now have some degree of immunity from it. Now, I will say to Paul that we're still learning a lot about this virus, and I will say there's not yet a solid scientific consensus about the degree of immunity that people develop following their infection. There is some evidence that the immunity begins, there's generally immunity, but it begins to diminish after a few months. And so we don't yet fully know. But you're right, Paul. There is, I think, a reasonable presumption that most people who have contracted COVID and recovered are generally immune for a period of time. And you're right. Knowing that should help us to get those people, certify them for going back to work safely and move to more and more economic activity. That's why we're doing this widespread antigen testing. This is based on serologic or blood testing rather than swabs to see if people developed the antibodies. And just stay tuned. I think the results of that study will initially be available next month. And I will say, Paul, we've been pushing hard as well for what are called, I think they're called point of care serologic tests, which is basically these little testing kits that you can buy for $8 or $10 per unit. And they are being used in some places. They can detect antibodies, but I'm told, and we've tested a number of these different kits, that they're only about 65-70% reliable. So they're not sufficiently reliable to kind of certify somebody with a high degree of confidence to go back into the workforce. And we do hope, though, that the technology will improve for those instant antigen or serologic tests. All right, Monique Plant says, are the pipelines getting built? Yes, Monique, they are. I was just out in Oyen 6 days ago with TC Energy to launch the construction on the Alberta spread of the Keystone XL pipeline. The project construction is underway in Alberta, Saskatchewan, Montana, South Dakota, Nebraska, Oklahoma, and Texas. You may have heard some news about U.S. court decisions. Those decisions have not suspended continued construction work on Keystone XL, which is happening because of the historic $1.5 billion preferred equity investment that the government of Alberta made in the project. There are going to be continued bureaucratic, legal, and political hurdles for Keystone XL, and there likely will be for Trans Mountain, which continues to be constructed. You can go to Southwest Edmonton, right near the Enoch Reserve, and you will see every day work being done, as it is in British Columbia, as it is down in Burnaby, to build TMX. And we won a critical victory in the Supreme Court of Canada, I think a week ago today, which upheld a unanimous Federal Court of Appeal decision saying that the governments have discharged our obligation, the duty of the Crown, fully to consult with Indigenous people, and underscored that 120 of the 128 interested First Nations either support or do not oppose TMX. I believe there's continued work on the Coastal Gas Link, and we just continue to fight for all these projects, including the completion of the Line 3 replacement in the United States. All right, next question.
Sure. So Coy Robbie asks, what can be done about cutting the red tape on the SRP, the Site Rehabilitation Program?
Yeah.
Our applications have been getting denied for the most absurd reasons.
Okay, thanks, Coy. We've been looking at, my office has been really focused on this the past couple of days. We got swamped with, by the way, let me back up and say for people who are not familiar, the Site Rehabilitation Program, that's $1 billion program that we launched about a month ago to get people to work in the oilfield service sector, remediating, cleaning up, or completing abandoned or orphaned oil field wells. Unfortunately, there's a lot of them across the province. Some of them belong to companies that are now bankrupt, and so it now becomes an industry and to some extent a public liability. And that's, we thought this was a great year to surge some money into reducing that environmental liability by accelerating the reclamation completion of those wells. So we put out the first tranche of applications of that $1 billion about 3 weeks ago. And I hear you, Coy, there's been a lot of frustration with the bureaucracy, bureaucratic give and take on that. Let me just say this. We received 36,000 applications for the first tranche.
Wow.
Which, I don't know, but that's at least 10 times more than they expected. So I'm now told that they've gone through all of those applications, that the projects approved in the first tranche, the money is flowing. They've learned lessons about the criteria to simplify the criteria, and they're now moving forward with tranche 3. So I'm sorry that this hasn't moved as seamlessly as possible, but the demand has been truly overwhelming. And I guess in a way that's a good problem to have. And Chris Austin has a related question. When will Albertans get to work cleaning up the abandoned oil wells? I just addressed that. Some of that work is underway now, and it's really going to pick up over the course of August and September. All right, next question.
Sure. So Shelley Stewart asks, please explain how giving tax cuts to corporations is going to help economic recovery better than giving people jobs. Well, I would say giving the job creation tax cut will result in people getting jobs because it's going to bring investment to Alberta, which will employ Albertans.
Yeah. So I think really the question, Shelley, is how do you create jobs? So, sure, I guess we could become a totally socialist economy and just have the government tax people at 70 or 80% and then pretend to create government jobs. And that hasn't worked out very well historically, Shelley. It's always been a disaster wherever that's been tried. The most prosperous societies in human history, including Alberta, by the way, which has one of the highest levels of per capita income in the world, and until the last 5 years has had one of the lowest levels of unemployment and the highest levels of overall employment. Well, that happened because of private sector economic development, Shelley, and that's the answer to your question. The job creation tax cut is designed to attract private sector job creating investment. And it is estimated by some of the country's leading economists, like Professor Jack Mintz, Professor Bev Dalby, that the job creation tax cut, once fully implemented, which started last week, will create an estimated 55,000 new full-time private sector jobs by incenting new business investment. We have such a tax advantage against other provinces. We are going to force businesses to consider moving operations from other provinces and other jurisdictions around the world to Alberta. Earlier today, I was on the phone with the chairman of one of the largest corporate conglomerates on the face of the earth, out of Mumbai, India, explaining to him the job creation tax cut and our red tape reduction initiative and our general pro-business policy setting, open for business policy setting. And I can tell you, keenly interested in what's going on here in Alberta as a result. All right.
And can I just add to that,
Please.
Premier? Shelley, what we can say for sure is what we did see under the previous government is by increasing taxes, that resulted in a flight of billions of dollars of investment out of our province, thousands of job losses, and ironically a decrease in the amount of revenue that actually came in.
Thanks, Tanya. So Dennis McNeil asks, how do you feel about Saudi investment in the oil sands? Dennis, I am very concerned about what the Saudis did in April during the height of the COVID crisis with the price collapse in oil. They surged supply, as did the Russians and other OPEC nations. And I think they did it very purposefully to try to drive North American energy production out of business. Because the Saudi companies, Saudi Aramco and so on, they are ultimately backed up by their sovereign state. They are, much like Gazprom and most of the Russian operators, the Kuwaitis, the OPEC oil producers are almost all state-owned enterprises or very closely connected to their sovereign states. And only in North America do we really have an industry that is dominated by publicly traded free enterprise companies, meaning they have much greater difficulty in getting access to capital. And I think what the Saudis were trying to do was to permanently damage both U.S. shale and the Canadian oil sands by driving prices into unprecedented lows. So I am very concerned, let's put it that way, about their strategic intentions. I do note that we're tracking that very closely, Dennis. I think we've seen a Saudi fund buy a small position in one of our large producers in the range of 1% of shares. We're keeping a close eye on that. If they were ever to seek to take a controlling interest, that would then be subject to the Canadian Foreign Investment Review Act. When I was a federal minister and there were Chinese state-owned enterprises trying to acquire Canadian oil assets, I worked to ensure that we added to the Canadian Foreign Investment Review process a national security criteria because we should not be naive in this country, and I don't believe we should ever, we're open for investment, but we should never put ourselves in a position where we are beholden to foreign states who do not share our strategic or economic interests. I hope that answers your question. Want to take the next?
Sure. So from Rebecca Jean Worth, what are you doing for towns like Brooks, Alberta, that are oil towns and don't have a lot of big business?
Well, do you want to start?
Sure. I mean, so Rebecca, I can start off by saying to what Premier and I were speaking about earlier, part of our economic recovery or Alberta's recovery plan is we are looking at several sector-specific strategies. Of course, energy being one of them, but of course, agriculture and tourism, looking at diversification around technology, aerospace and aviation, financial services, looking for ways that we can help some of our small towns diversify and look at other sectors.
Absolutely. And Rebecca, I was just down in Brooks, I think a week ago today, with Michaela Glasgow. I also met with Mayor Barry Morishita and met with small business folks in the area. I'll say this. I know Brooks has been hit very hard because of the decline in the oil and gas sector over the past 4 or 5 years. But I think it's fortunate that Brooks has been it is fairly diversified because you've got a very strong agricultural sector around there. Of course, one aspect of that is the JBS meatpacking plant. But at the end of the day, what we're doing for towns like Brooks is the $1 billion investment in accelerated well reclamation to put oil field service people back to work. It's the $1.5 billion investment in Keystone XL, which is going to create thousands of good construction jobs. It's the $10 billion investment in the capital build across the province, which will include projects in and around Brooks. We estimate that will create 50,000 jobs this year alone. I talked to Mayor Morishita last week in Brooks about a number of exciting prospective new private sector investments. And some of those will be leveraged in part through our job creation tax cut and our red tape reduction strategy to bring new investment to the community. So those are some of the things that we are doing to help out in smaller communities like the Brooks that have been hit so hard. Do you want to take the next?
Sure. So Chris Denholm, what's the status of the carbon tax lawsuits?
Great, Chris. So we, first of all, you're right, there's a number of lawsuits, and they were, so I'm going to unpack them. There's Saskatchewan, Ontario, and Alberta. All three provinces challenged the constitutionality of the federal carbon tax. Unfortunately, our friends and allies in Saskatchewan and Ontario lost, but in both cases on split decisions. In Saskatchewan, it was a 2-1 decision at their Court of Appeal. In Ontario, I think it was a 3-2 decision. Here in Alberta, we won on a 4-1 decision. In a critical historical constitutional judgment, which said that the federal carbon tax was, quotes, a constitutional Trojan horse, that the federal government was interfering in our exclusive jurisdiction to develop our resources. So all three of those provincial appeal court reference decisions are now proceeding to the Supreme Court of Canada. We were hoping the Supreme Court would hear arguments this spring, meaning they would render a decision this fall, but because COVID has affected the operation of the courts, there's been a delay on that. And I believe that the current schedule is for oral arguments to be heard on the appeals in September, but that is to be confirmed.
I'm going to read the next question from Dennis McNeil. When is it ever a good time to increase the minimum wage in Alberta, in your esteemed opinion?
Well, Dennis, I would say, by the way, we've commissioned a report of an expert panel on the minimum wage increase in Alberta, partly to answer that question, and that report will be released shortly, and it will confirm that the 50% increase of the minimum wage by the previous government in the midst of a massive recession cost upwards of 25,000 jobs, primarily jobs for younger people who are entering into the labor market. So it was a massive job killer. I guess in answer to your question, I would say that the right time to increase the minimum wage is if it has fallen well behind inflation, and if you're in a period of economic growth. But if you're in a period of economic contraction, raising the cost of labor has only one outcome. It puts people out of work. And what some folks don't seem to understand is that, or they don't fully appreciate, is that a $13 an hour minimum wage job is a heck of a lot better than a $0 income from unemployment. And 25,000 people went from minimum wage employment to zero employment under the previous government. I think it was cruel, it was hard-hearted, it was based on economic illiteracy, but it was done, and it's now wired in. And what we've said is that we will maintain the general minimum wage, and however, we did bring in the youth job creation wage, recognizing that 14, 15, 16-year-olds are much less likely to be employed at the same wage level as fully trained adults. And we want to make sure those young people get their first job up in the labor market. So we did bring in the $2 lower youth job creation wage. And as per our platform commitment, we've been looking at whether, through the advice of the expert panel on the minimum wage, whether or not liquor servers who make tip income would do better with more hours and more tip income through returning to the liquor server minimum wage differential, and just stay tuned for, we're still discussing that issue. All right, Kathleen Tester says, is there any focus outside of oil and gas to get companies started?
Yes. Sorry. Yes, of course, Kathleen, I can take that one if that's okay, Premier. So as we mentioned before, we have many sectoral strategies that we're going to be rolling out, and maybe I'll talk a little bit about our tech and innovation, some of the measures we've taken there. We are recapitalizing the Alberta Enterprise Corporation with $175 million over 3 years. The Alberta Enterprise Corporation takes the funds that the government gives them and invests those in venture capital funds that invest invest in tech startups or startup companies that diversify the economy. And for every $1 of government funding, they leverage $4 of private sector funding. We're also going to be introducing an innovation employment grant, which is going to be great for encouraging research and development and innovation. And the companies that benefit from that, once they start to scale up and become profitable, then they'll switch from that to our job creation tax cut. And we know, and as has been mentioned before, technology is not only a sector in itself, but it benefits all sectors, from agriculture to energy and everything in between. So we're really excited about some of these sectors and strategies that we're going to be rolling out as we work on our technology and innovation approach.
Absolutely. Chris Levam says, could your government look to create a petrochemical industry around Calgary to not just the heartland, the southern foothills of natural gas too? Great point, Chris, and you're right. First of all, we've done some things to really support the natural gas industry in the south, which tends to be dry gas and with shallow wells. And we did that in part by providing a retroactive reduction in the linear tax that was really crushing a lot of dry gas producers. We're also doing a top-to-bottom review of that tax assessment rules for natural gas in Alberta. And our colleague Dale Nally, Minister, we actually created a specific job, the Associate Minister for Natural Gas, and he's done an amazing job working with upstream producers, midstream companies like TC Energy through the Nova gas pipeline system, as well as downstream customers like the petrochemical companies, to develop a consensus that allowed us to have a voluntary shut-in of production, particularly during the summer months, during which time the Nova system is being repaired. In the past, we had a huge glut that drove us into negative price territory. And for much of the past 3-4 years in the summer, we were averaging 10 cents or minus prices on per BCF for natural gas in Alberta. But since Minister Nally got this new arrangement approved by the up, mid, and downstream players and by the National Energy Board, which regulates the Nova system, we've seen a massive rebound, a very important rebound in Alberta natural gas prices, going from, like I said, I think on an average annual basis 40 cents to now about $1.90. So effectively on a currency adjusted basis, the AECO price for Alberta natural gas is the same as the Henry Hub price, which is as you know, the key benchmark North American price. On the question of petrochems, we do have petrochem facilities around Alberta. Obviously, the Joffre plant is a significant petrochem player just north of Calgary, northeast of Calgary, and they're owned by Mubdala, a Emirati company. And just earlier this week, I was on the phone with the global CEO of a major multinational petrochemical company talking about a prospective investment in petrochems in the Calgary region. So this is not, the reason I mentioned the industrial heartland is it has become the center of the Alberta petrochemical industry. They've got a great pre-approved zone out there, very facilitative. But we'd love to see these developments elsewhere, including Grand Prairie, which is pushing hard for this. We're just going to take a couple more questions.
Sure.
Go ahead, Tam.
Yeah, Ryan Kurtz asks, can we get rid of the safe injection sites and start helping people, not enabling them?
Thank you, Ryan. This is a very important question. And our colleague, the Associate Minister for Mental Health and Addictions, Jason Lewan, is working on that issue. We appointed, as per our platform commitment, an expert panel on the safe injection sites, which I'd ask our staff, our team here, please to link in the comments section below the report of the expert panel, which found that many of the so-called safe injection sites, the illegal drug sites, had resulted in a significant increase in crime, in social disorder in many communities across the province, and that there was no compelling evidence to support the claim that these were saving lives, and so we are taking a very close look at next steps. There is an audit underway, for example, on the drug site in Lethbridge to look at allegations of financial and management, financial irregularities and allegations of management incompetence. So stay tuned for those reports. But I will tell you this, Ryan. Our focus is very much on increasing access to treatment and recovery options for people struggling with addiction. We think that is the compassionate approach. We need more detox beds that lead directly in to what are called therapeutic communities that support treatment programs and long-term lifetime recovery. The previous government took an obsessive focus on only one approach, which was, frankly, helping addicts to maintain their addiction through drug injection. And that has nothing to do with the meth users, for example, that have become created an enormous crime and social problems around the Beltline in Calgary near the Sheldon Schumer Center and in other places. So our focus is on making unprecedented, historic investments in detox, therapeutic communities, recovery, and treatment. We're investing a large amount of our $150 million mental health and addiction strategy in creating thousands of new beds, and there will be more news to follow. In fact, I'll be making some very exciting announcements in that respect shortly. I guess we'll take this as the last question.
Sure. So Joe Kuchar asks, is it fair that daycares are allowed to hike fees by 30% due to COVID? This being done without notice, isn't there any regulations around this type of increase? So, I mean, I know Minister Schultz, our Minister of Children's Services, has been working very hard throughout this pandemic, has been in regular touch with daycares. And, you know, for those that are considering hiking fees by that amount, I think that would be a difficult decision for them, given that might drive their clients to other daycare services as everyone's trying their best to recover through this.
I hadn't heard of that complaint, and we'll certainly bring that to Minister Schultz's attention.
Absolutely.
Folks, thank you very much. We've been at this for nearly an hour and 15 minutes, and I know that Tanya and I have both got other things we have to attend to, so thanks for your good questions. I'm sorry we couldn't get to all of them. As is usually the case, I try to get back and do some written responses later on. Look forward to doing another one of these, and I encourage you to take a look online at Alberta's recovery plan. Let us know what you think. It's a work in progress. We're still fleshing out our sector strategies. There's a lot more to come, but I just want you to know that Alberta's government is doing everything within our power, obviously to help save lives through the pandemic, but also to save livelihoods through our economic recovery plan. Thanks very much.